So welcome back to this second to last discussion on the mission-oriented research agenda on cooperation. Although, as I said, I will probably add a supplementary video reviewing what I actually have concluded in chapter 9, which I skipped again. So there may be a surprise still ahead. So lastly, we discussed the Italian community cooperatives, and as I teased in the end of the last video, now we're getting to the Anglo-Saxon world. And in fact, I'm now moving on to cooperative conversions and community development in the UK. Again, taking an ecological view, as we have in the case of Italy, and as we will in the next video, likely on Berlin. So as stated in preceding lectures and elsewhere, if cooperatives are to move from the margins of the economy to having greater presence, then not only must there be more new cooperative startups, but many more firms need to be converted from investor-owned to worker-owned or user-owned firms. For a little background, I take this from a passage from something by a friend of mine, Marcello Vieta, who studies conversions to cooperatives. And he writes that the UK has also had historical experiences with workplace occupations and worker recuperated firms. As worker-led responses to the business restructuring, deindustrialization, and rising unemployment of the late 1960s and early 1970s, Glasgow's Upper Clyde shipyards work-ins in 1971 inspired a wave of occupations of over 260 firms throughout the 1970s. Many of these became worker cooperatives or firms run under workers' control or workers' councils and were supported by their unions and for a time by the Labour and Conservative governments of the decade. In addition, in 1976, the British Parliament passed legislation in support of the creation of worker cooperatives that became the International Common Ownership Movement, or ICOM. By 2001, the ICOM movement had created over 2,000 cooperatives. Today, transfers of businesses to cooperatives in the UK are also present, but less common than in other European jurisdictions. Instead, in the UK, the ESOP model is more widespread, with employee ownership shares held in trusts, as with the John Lewis model, or in combination of direct and trust-held share ownership. While the former Conservative-led coalition government of David Cameron passed additional legislation to favor employee shareholdership provision, this legislation had mixed results in promoting new ESOPs on labor-managed firms. Most recently, former Labour Party leader Ed Miliband had been explicitly advocating for the UK government's increased support in worker buyout solutions, while under Jeremy Corbyn's leadership, the Labour Party in early 2016 and again in 2017 election manifesto announced a policy platform that included the facilitation of worker buyouts and workers' shares in company ownership. One interesting aspect of the recent cooperative history of the UK, and I maybe should take a step back and suggest that this report was actually written in collaboration with Marcello Vieta for a Canadian project that was spearheaded by the government of the province of Ontario to study cooperative conversions. So this is the context of the background behind which this was produced. So again, one of the interesting aspects of the recent cooperative history of the UK is its shift from single stakeholder models and frames of mind that I've outlined in the prior module on the legacy of Webbian socialism of Sidney and Beatrice Webb to a multi-stakeholder frame of mind. This shift is occurring at many levels. Firstly, within the institutional structures associated with Cooperatives UK, with notions like community shares, which I discuss in a moment, cropping up, and where such phenomena were more seldom in Britain before recently. At the same time, this trend reflects a general shift away from Webbian cooperatives. The shift, again, which I did describe priorly with reference to Italy in the 1960s and the rise of the New Left, as opposed to Italy with figures like Franco Basaglia, this process was more slow to find institutional efficacy in the UK, where over time the Webbian concept of a common bond has become dominant, as Rory Ridley Duff and co-authors have argued. In keeping with this recent shift, a trend towards more community investment in business is visible across the UK. A report by Cooperatives UK found that people are investing in a diverse range of organizations, from tackling climate change to providing innovative social care and housing models, all taking a community-led, inclusive, and democratic approach. This democratic ownership is a significant motivator, with 46% investing because they would become co-owners of the business. As regards the ecosystem of UK cooperative law is very diffuse. There is no single basis in cooperative law. That means cooperatives are not a legal form in and of themselves, like in Italy, but usually a derivation of a society and on occasion of a company. It is therefore possible to make use of flexible company laws to select options best suited to particular needs, including both individual and collective ownership structures like trusts. And of course, this is a result of the particular history and context of British common law systems and the nature of the evolving notion of juridical persons within the UK. The reverse side of this coin, of course, is a complex system of legal principles that can be confusing to stakeholders. One of the main problems in facilitating conversions to cooperatives in any form is the lack of resources for professional development and education, or PDE, for financial advisors and accountants. The greater cooperative ecosystem, which includes Cooperatives UK and the Employee Ownership Association, which I introduced in a moment, have recently invested resources in expanding PDE opportunities. Also, each of the devolved governments, that is the Scottish, the Welsh, and so on, Northern Ireland, has certain institutions at its disposal, including the Wales Cooperative Centre, Cooperative Development Scotland, and the Scottish Land Trust. Additionally, a number of cooperative hubs exist, including Sheffield and Leeds. Cooperative conversion is relatively dispersed throughout the UK, with roughly 17% occurring in the southeast. One of the more interesting recent developments fueling the interest in such models is the glut of business for sale as the so-called baby boomer generation approaches retirement. This glut and a general concern for retaining local jobs and for general social welfare of workers has led to a general concern for renewed interest in what Nathan Schneider and others have called exit to community, which seeks to move ownership of firms away from the venture capital-based model of privatization and to instead direct ownership and stewardship later to general communities. With phenomena like community shares serving almost like an evolutionary pressure in our ecosystem, as one stakeholder commented. In addition to the community shares model, various other trust forms and have gained popularity in recent years, or various trust forms rather, including employee benefit trusts, EBTs, and employee ownership trusts, EOTs. The actual conversion of businesses to cooperatives is dominated by the EOT organization in the UK, which is not without its criticisms. Cooperatives on their representative organizations like Cooperatives UK have only lately entered the discussion with projects like the Ownership Hub, designed to increase awareness of worker ownership in addition to the employee trust option. Cooperatives UK resulted in a 2001 merger of two previous cooperative development organizations, ICOM, and which represented the cooperative worker cooperatives, and the previous cooperative union, which represented consumer cooperatives. The two legacy organizations represented worker and community, the consumer cooperatives, as I suggested, and were separated as a result of the influence of Beatrice and Sidney Webb. As such, Cooperatives UK is the central membership organization for the cooperative enterprise throughout the UK. Today, Cooperatives UK focuses on promoting cooperatives by lobbying policymakers and raising awareness through campaigning activities, developing cooperatives through initiatives and specialist advice, and on uniting cooperatives with various initiatives. Moreover, Cooperative UK extends to promoting business to cooperative conversions. This involves, for instance, advocating different national, local governments to create more enabling frameworks for cooperatives, existing competition, new startups, and also conversions. As part of this advocacy, Cooperatives UK recognizes the diverse and divergent landscape of business to cooperative conversions in the UK, with phenomena like traditional worker buyouts being accompanied by various trust and community ownership approaches. Much of the current efforts of Cooperatives UK are therefore dedicated to studying international best practices in countries like Spain and Italy. Its resources are limited, however, and in many ways, Cooperatives UK is only coming to the table of late. Undoubtedly, the most popular form of business to cooperative conversions, if one could call it that in the UK, is the so-called employee ownership trust. It accounts for roughly 90% of all conversions annually. Prior to new legislation, however, there were few tax incentives for selling to employees, and such conversions were relatively rare, showing the importance of the legal structure in facilitating these types of transformations. Exceptions include the John Lewis Partnership, a chain of department and retail stores that were converted into a worker cooperative shortly after the death of the founder, John Lewis, in the 19th century. The predecessor to the Employee Ownership Association, or EOA, which is the main body advocating for EOTs, Employee Ownership Trusts, was founded as the Job Ownership Limited, JOL. Founded in 1979 by journalist Robert Oakeshott, it was established with the help of companies such as the John Lewis Partnership and international polymers manufacturer Scott Bader. Oakeshott was active in advocating for employee ownership and wrote a book on the topic entitled Jobs and Fairness. In 2012, Graham Nuttall was commissioned by the Department for Business, Innovation and Skills to independently review the situation of employee ownership in the UK. The report's key findings, which the report is called the Nuttall Report, were a lack of awareness of the concept of employee ownership, a lack of resources available to support employee ownership, and the actual or perceived legal, tax, and other regulatory complexities of employee ownership. Meanwhile, the benefits to employee ownership were summarized elegantly. It means a significant and meaningful stake in business for all employees. According to the trust structure, the stake is held collectively by a trustee. I discuss the details of the EOT further on. By 2013, legislation was enacted to promote collective ownership of shares by employees. Following the findings of the Nuttall Review, and in order to support this sector, the government has decided to introduce 2 tax reliefs to encourage, promote, and support indirect employee ownership structures. Since the passage of this legislation, EOTs have become the dominant form of BCCs, or business to cooperative conversions, in the UK, and the Employee Ownership Association is the main body responsible for lobbying, informing governments and the general public, providing resources for studying and analyzing EOTs and producing reports, including annual reviews, national strategy papers, and developing joint projects such as the Ownership Hub, which I discuss in a moment. As to learning opportunities, multiple stakeholders agree that there could be more learning opportunities on business to cooperative conversions for owners as well as for workers and the wider community. Recent efforts like the Community Shares Unit of Cooperatives UK and the Ownership Hub have attempted to fill that gap. However, at present, much of the advocacy is carried out at the level of community learning, exchanging networks, and things of that nature. Local ecosystems and their actors have acted to fill the gap. For example, Radical Roots in Leeds have spent significant effort in producing literature on startup, worker, and housing cooperatives and business to cooperative conversions. One of these examples is the Ownership Hub, as I've mentioned prior. The co-production of Cooperatives UK and the Employee Ownership Association, the Ownership Hub aims to support economic regions, offering them expertise and resources to grow employee and worker ownership as part of their economic strategy. As part of this effort, it attempts to reach and train business advisors, accountants, lawyers, and banks who advise entrepreneurs and business owners how to start, scale up, or convert a business to employee and worker ownership. Its first regional partner is Sheffield, whose mayor has said of the hub, it is an integral part of a greater effort to not just create a more dynamic, productive, and resilient economy, but to reform its structure, to change the system in a way which makes it fairer, more inclusive, and better able to serve the aspiration and needs of the people of South Yorkshire. The hub is the first practical project from the joint project entitled 1 Million Owners. This project has made its task advocating a five-fold expansion in employee and worker ownership over the next decade, leading to 1 million employee and worker owners in the UK by 2030. It aims to do this by requesting a government allocate up to £6 million in the 2021 spending review to support up to 12 combined authorities or local enterprise partnerships to participate in our ownership hub program. Quote, the ownership hub distinguishes between employee ownership related to the employee ownership trusts and similar such structures, and worker ownership more related to the cooperative structures, such as worker cooperatives. Although one of the challenges Cooperatives UK currently confronts is the lack of a menu of options in front of stakeholders, which has led to a situation where the EOT, or Employee Ownership Trust, becomes the most attractive option by default. In case the political leadership there might have more appetite for doing more democratic or potentially more radical things on the conversion side, a more granular approach with options like a democratic EOT would certainly increase the available options. Community shares is one of the most interesting developments in the UK business to cooperative conversions landscape in recent years. Amusingly, the approach itself isn't actually new. Community shares is a branding for withdrawable share capital. Societies have been using withdrawable share capital for 100 years. It's actually not a new innovation, as Isla McCullough has suggested in an interview. In practice, community shares refers to a situation where communities are using the registered society, formerly industrial and provident society, legal form to issue withdrawable shares to their communities to fund purchase of community assets such as pubs, shops, farms, and even piers. Community shares enterprises are mostly run by volunteers. 205,560 volunteers in the sector were compared to only 33,900 employees in a recent estimate, or 5 in 6 of those working within the community businesses are volunteers. Community shares was part of the big society reforms of the Conservative government after 2010, designed to bootstrap the former third sector to fill the vacuum left by a rapid withdrawal of the state from civil society. Its genesis was associated with a particular brand of austerity politics. Mark Simmons argues, in fact, that the supportive legislation and tax efficiencies were incidental. The policy was not created to specifically benefit the community shares market. As part of the policy, large amounts of money were sequestered from dormant bank accounts, and social investment finance intermediaries were created to lend this money to what was now being called voluntary community and social enterprise, VCSE, sector as part of this process. Since 2012, more than £155 million has been raised through the community shares by 104,203 people. Understanding a maturing community shares market observes some of the main findings of community shares legacy. The report made some startling revelations. In particular, it found that while 80% of so-called angel investors are based in London, these are venture capitalists in London and the Southeast, community shares investors are more widely distributed. Only 18%, again compared to 80%, are in London and the Southeast, the report found. Moreover, community shares investors are far more female and quite a bit more evenly distributed across the income ladder than angel investors. Moreover, the key role of community shares equity is non-asset-based businesses, such as in the health and social care sector, and that key role is notable. The average interest paid on community shares is 4.8% and has seen less than 2% of assets lost or written off. Investments in community share offers can be for as little as £10 with an average investment of £395. Shares are also withdrawable in most cases, granted the business is able to provide the liquidity. Therefore, community shares can be described as both patient and flexible capital. Next, I go back to the employee ownership trust, which I've described in passing before. As mentioned above or before, the EOT is by far the most popular form of business to cooperative conversion in the UK at present, although it's arguable if it even entails a cooperative form, as some have critiqued. The legal form was established in the Finance Act of 2014. The purpose of an EOT is to provide permanent or long-term employee ownership of a company or group through holding a significant proportion of a company's shares for all employees. In particular, the shares are held collectively in the form of a trust. Furthermore, the trust structure has a discretionary governance structure with trustees empowered to hold shares for the benefit of all employees. The trustee is entrusted with the task of ensuring good working conditions, both individual and collective voice, and a financial stake in the firm's success. The main distinguishing feature of an EOT is the creation of a separate legal entity from the firm in the form of a trust, which is a particular innovation of Anglo-Saxon law, which holds a significant share of equity in the focal organization on behalf of employees. As such, the structure intends to promote both the active engagement on the part of employees, but also contribute to profit sharing. It therefore addresses both issues of expressive and instrumental rationality, as Isabel Ferreiras argues. A trust deed sets out terms, or according to her nomenclature rather, a trust deed sets out terms between the trust stakeholders. This document is not necessarily publicly available. The trust is administered by a legal trustee. The trustee has a constitution referred to as the Trustee Articles of Association. Governance decisions are made by the trustee board, whose composition is not prescribed by law. However, it is generally agreed that good practice for EOTs is parity, where equal representation on the board is made vis-a-vis employee and management representatives, plus one independent board member. EOTs generally have both employee committees, works councils, as well as employee representation on these trust boards. In short, therefore, an EOT consists generally of three structures: the employee trust, the trustee company, and the limited trading company. The trustee company acquires a controlling stake in the focal organization and receives a complete exemption from the capital gains tax for individuals selling to the trustee in the tax year in which the trustee acquires that controlling interest. Benefits include up to £3,600 of tax exemption per employee per year. Thus, there are several tax benefits to owners choosing to sell their companies to an EOT-led worker buyout. As the Treasury has stated, this mechanism by which employees are given a voice will depend on the terms of the trust deed established by the EOT, the company, and culture in question. So it's a very variable phenomenon, very different from the Italian context, in fact. To have some different UK stakeholders' perspective on this entire system here, first of all, getting to the perspective of owners. In many cases, owners are interested in including workers in the ownership and management of companies. Rory Ridley Duff has suggested that around 30% of UK entrepreneurs start companies with social goals strictly in mind. Graham Nuttall also has suggested that one of the greatest bottlenecks in the UK environment to such owner-motivated conversions is the lack of experience on the part of financial advisors. Due to lack of exposure to the idea on the part of the latter cohort, many conversions never actually occur because the advisors are not aware of it, and so they advise against it, and so it never happens. Therefore, providing more resources to professional education and development, as has been suggested, would provide owners with a greater set of resources and a broader range of advice from financial advisors and accountants. The social goals can vary in their intensity, and with certain owners preferring to benefit the community more than themselves. Islam McCullough at one point suggested that some owners have often been quite benevolent and philanthropic, almost running a shop as an act of I've got money, I don't need to make money doing this. Even if I break even or make a bit of a loss on it, I'm happy to be the shopkeeper. Of course, this is not a general scenario. Finding avenues to promote community stewardship of such enterprises appears a beneficial policy for the future. This becomes particularly relevant in the face of frequent conflict between different forms of rationality and different stakeholders, which can put owners in the uncomfortable position of pitting their interests in the local community against their pecuniary self-interest, as the following quote showcases. There have been some owners who have been really reticent, but I think most of that's due to market forces where they go. If we sell to the community and keep it as a pub, then we're only going to get the pub market value for this asset. We could sell it to a housing developer and get 3 times as much. So even if I love the community, money wins. I'm going for the highest bidder. And that's where the owner-community relationship has been really dodgy because of the property markets and perceived value or market value of these assets and businesses. And that's where communities feel very threatened, because not only are they not actually that fussed about running it, but they know if that gets converted to a high-end boutique, the community will lose a further place of congregation. This suggests that providing owners with both more education as well as incentives towards alternative succession plans appears generally desirable. Second, for the worker perspective, the UK is facing many problems in its labor market. As Mark Simmons of Co-op Culture puts it, we're rapidly moving into a complete gig economy. This is in part due to the long-standing weakening of the British working classes, including the union movement, which began in the 1970s and culminated in the Thatcher years. In keeping with this dissipative trend, workers' perspectives on conversions vary widely. One of the main issues preventing more business to cooperative conversions is the information asymmetry in a regular workplace, which, quote, have a quite insular management and then a disempowered workforce, who may not know that a business to cooperative conversion is an option. This can be compounded when the workforce is led to believe that management practices are esoteric, difficult, and require almost magical understanding. Just as an example, whereas in Argentina there are roughly 400 worker-run enterprises that emerged in a struggle against management, as Marcelo Vieta has cataloged in his book, only around 10 of these exist in the UK, including Calvert's and Enabled Works. This creates in many workplaces a static situation where inertial forces prevent a new culture from taking root. The near total lack of worker buyouts with regards to management buyouts can also be attributed to this asymmetry, because management understands what it takes to run the business, as opposed to many workers. In many ways, the 1 million owner scheme is an attempt to address these disconnects. It involves dealing with workers, owners, and local stakeholders, including governments, to push voluntary inclusion of the workforce in issues of strategic management, including direct ownership stakes in their firms. Lastly, for the community perspective, community members often become interested in cooperative conversions when an essential link to the community chain, for instance, a community pub or local grocers in an isolated community, runs into financial difficulties or is forced to close. In such cases, it is often members of the community rather than the prior owners who initiate efforts to convert the business into, for instance, a community enterprise via community shares. Moreover, many legacy businesses are keystones in their local community, and both community members and legacy owners are members of the community, then interested in maintaining them. When you've got family business where it's been someone's life work, and to get to the point that it is, they don't want to lose that, as one stakeholder suggested. And I imagine there's a bit of empathy and positive feeling towards the workers as well around preserving the job. A notable case study is VME, which is the largest IT firm converted to a cooperative. Its business is providing IT services to consumer cooperatives, and it provides IT services to 9 of the 13 independent retail cooperatives in the UK. It began its life as a family business in 1988. In 2004, a management buyout led by current CEO Stephen Gill was promulgated. Gill had had a very clear vision of converting the firm into a democratic enterprise, although his ambition wasn't initially to choose the cooperative model. Stephen, along with Aaron Stewart, general counsel of VME, assessed various options for conversion based on 3 main criteria. Firstly, the long-term viability of the firm. Secondly, a fair return for the shares to be transferred to the successor firm. And thirdly, staff security. There was little interest in developing a solution that ended up in a shrunken and battered firm coming out at the other end. The conversion was a complicated affair. Although workers were open to the idea, there was a lack of awareness on the part of the financial advisors and generally a difficult ecosystem. This resulted in 4 attempts until the plan was successful. These attempts involved, among others, an attempt at a conversion into a cooperative society, as well as reincorporation in Malta, though none of these attempts were successful. In particular, a problem was giving a fair share to the beneficial owners while at the same time respecting the democratic vision cooperation entails. Finally, in June 2020, a conversion via the employee ownership trust method was successfully promulgated. Stephen Gill has suggested that one of the primary motivators in choosing this model was the tax incentive that the EOT model receives. The fact that owners were compensated early, management had less than 50% of the shares, was ultimately a deciding factor, one among several. VME is structured as an EOT, with a multi-stakeholder structure featuring three classes: an EOT class, a labor class, and an investor class that is non-voting. For general outlines, and you see the outline of this conversion actually on the picture on the right here. For the general outline of the structures, see this picture. As it's probably cut off a bit, as workers have labor shares, all workers have labor shares. These are designed to dilute power and to distribute inclusive governance. These were in fact a compromise with the statutory requirements of the EOTs, in which the trustee is required to have a majority stake in the trustee company. In the case of VME, the policy as recorded in the trustee deed was to emphasize the fiduciary duty entailed by the trustee relationship. This duty is interpreted as being not only symbolic in that the workers can sue if trustee and policies are implemented that are not in keeping with their interests. As such, labor shares to act to provide transparency. While the outstanding debts of the conversion are paid off, the prior owners, in this case Stephen Gill and Richard Coyle, have a veto in board decisions. The company employs a sociocracy as a governance framework. This has the advantage of formal mechanisms for developing democratic and management skills. This structure helps develop a skills basis for future owners. There are 3 tiers divided into 28 circles, plus co-optation where members of each circle compromise another circle. In the eyes of CEO Stephen Gill, this has the advantage of a formal mechanism for developing democratic and management skills. The observation was shared that the EOT model is in fact in conflict with the increased employee participation due to the conflicting needs of increasing the latter on the one hand and legislative requirements on the other. There is therefore more need for balancing the interests of employee shares within the trust with statutory stipulation. Customer feedback has been positive. One of the problems with changing the culture of a firm, of course, is the problem of hysteresis, the path dependency of environments, personalities, and behaviors, as described in prior lectures. Therefore, the change involves changing the role of workers from decision takers to decision makers, as General Counsel Aaron Stewart remarked. He continued that the act of making decisions together changes everyone, not sparing himself in the observation. The company is taking the 5th cooperative principle, education, training, and information, to heart, and has invested in sending members to ICCM at St. Mary's University in Halifax, Canada, to learn cooperative management techniques. The main lessons for stakeholders of VME was that the EOT model tends to favor a management buyout due to the complexities of the process. These complexities mean that workers are often left in the dark as to their legal rights, leading CEO Stephen Gill to conclude that there is a need to simplify such processes. One of the goals VME has set is to systematize aspects like the delegation of authority via structures like sociocracy. In general, as I said, the customer feedback after conversion has been positive, with both CEO and general counsel support creating a tax relief for straight cooperative conversions, that is, moving beyond the EOT model. Due to the lack of funding for such conversions, Gill, Stewart, and colleagues have initiated Co-op Exchange, a project to create seed funding for UK cooperatives or cooperatives worldwide, which has met with approval by the International Cooperative Alliance. Co-op Exchange is registered as a PLC, a private limited company, and seeks to apply cooperative principles within the legal framework of venture capital funding directed towards cooperative enterprises globally. This follows the argument, why should the devil have all the good tunes? The patchwork of business to cooperative conversion frameworks in the UK has both been praised and criticized by various stakeholders. It has been praised for giving owners, workers, and community members a menu of options and not nailing to a cross the cooperative identity. At the same time, the diffusive quality has been criticized as being complex and unwieldy. Moreover, the lack of professional education and development has meant that many tax and financial advisors are not aware of the landscape of business to cooperative conversion options in the UK. Aaron Stewart, lead counsel of VME, has observed critically that even law firms specializing in cooperative law usually only have one division dedicated to the topic. Programs like 1 Million Owners and the Ownership Hub have sought to bridge that gap. It is too early to ascertain their success yet. Their efforts are critical, as Stewart has described the opportunity of retiring baby boomer entrepreneurs as a short window. This has also been referred to as a silver tsunami. The EOT phenomenon appears to have broken through the sound barrier, to borrow Amy Goodman's phrase, by providing a relatively intelligible, moderately simple legal structure for conversions, while at the same time enjoying certain material, i.e. tax incentives, and being embraced by conservative governments as part of the big society reforms, the EOT appears to have achieved a modicum of legitimacy and recognition, both in the eyes of the general public as well as in critical circles of tax and financial advisors. As such, it appears to be succeeding in pushing the issue of more inclusive and accountable business cultures and providing a basis for a model of succession beyond a trade sale to a generation of retiring business owners. At the same time, EOT has been criticized as being ambivalent to democracy. While EOT provides a framework for inclusion, accountability, and equity, the precise balance of power in each EOT is dependent on the particular's trust agreement, therefore, which are generally not public. Therefore, a more granular approach to developing more explicitly democratic EOT structures, connecting these with the principles of mutualism and worker control is desirable. Regarding the need to improve upon the EOT model, Stephen Gill, CEO of BME Co-op, argued that cooperation is not just about ownership and that his company is interested in developing a cooperative identity. BME Senior Counsel Aaron Stewart additionally remarked that the EOT form does not create cooperatives. Cooperatives UK has admitted that it has been late in joining the discourse around EOT and is now retroactively investing resources into such a qualitatively more granular approach to the phenomenon. With a focus on democratic employee ownership trust, they have initiated research into best practices for achieving participation on the part of workers in EOT firms. Such projects should be welcomed both by the Employee Ownership Association and the greater business community, as a pluralistic economy requires various models to suit diverse needs. And in closing, I should refer to Katharina Pistor's Code of Capital and the notion of hacking or reappropriating codes for new purposes that could be employed in the context of the EOT form. And certainly her discussion of the role of lawyers in the legal profession in establishing the legal codes in contract law and property titles is certainly relevant in the context of the British legal structures towards business to cooperative conversions. In closing, while the UK may be considered unfriendly towards cooperation, innovative projects are cropping, as Cliff Mills has suggested, innovative projects are cropping up across the country in response to demographic and larger social shifts. The EOT and community shares phenomena present two valuable methods to business succession towards cooperation. Each displays certain strengths and weaknesses. In the case of the EOT, a frequent criticism was the ambivalent stance towards democratic governance, which arguably leaves too much to individual trust deeds, which themselves are frequently not in the public domain. Moreover, from a tax benefit advantage, a frequent refrain was that the EOT is the only game in town. Creating a more diverse legal framework for promoting business to cooperative conversions would appear to serve the interests of owners, workers, and the wider communities they serve. The EOT model can be improved upon, and it provides a solid backbone to increasing employee ownership, but it should be part of a more diverse landscape of democratic governance. In the next and potentially last video, I discussed Berlin's cooperative ecology with the platform cooperative movement there. Hope to see you.